Many years ago, I remember coming across an article on the website of a mainstream magazine, the name of which escapes me now, and it was about a young woman who claimed to be the victim of a highly organized and high-tech harassment campaign. She had no idea who was doing it, but reported sounds and voices which she heard inside of her own head. She was followed, and she heard voices and unnerving sounds being emitted from various electronic devices, namely the stereo and the television in her house. But the most interesting part of this story, however, was that her mother had also witnessed some of this harassment. She had also heard the noises and the voices coming from the appliances, and she had seen people following her daughter, which suggests to me that this was not happening in the young woman's head. She was actually experiencing this. Later, I came to learn of the terms gang stalking and targeted individual, and like most people who come across these stories, I put the vast majority of reported gang stalking activity down to some sort of mental illness. I mean, why would any agency go to all this trouble to harass some nobody? But as you will soon see, psychological experimentation on unsuspecting members of the public is a reality. After winning a fellowship at Yale in 1946, José Manuel Rodriguez Delgado began experimenting with the effects of implanted electrodes within the brains of animals and later human beings. He developed a device called the stimoceiver, which used radio waves to influence brain waves. The stimocievers, which were as small as a $50, could be used to stimulate emotions and control behavior, and according to Rodriguez Delgado, quote, stimulation of different points in the amygdala and hippocampus in the 4 patients produced a variety of effects, including pleasant sensations, elation, deep thoughtful concentration, odd feelings, super relaxation, colored visions, and other responses, close quote. And he also stated that, quote, the brain transmitters can remain in a person's head for life. The energy to activate the brain transmitter is transmitted by way of radio frequencies, close quote. Rodriguez Delgado became somewhat famous in 1963 after a demonstration in Spain involving a bull which had been implanted with a stimoceiver. Using a remote control, the doctor successfully and repeatedly halted the bull's charge with the press of a button. From late 1959 to early 1962, Henry Alexander Murray was responsible for the unethical experiments in which he used 22 Harvard undergraduates as research subjects. The experiment sought to measure an individual's response to extreme stress. The undergraduates, who were unaware that they were being tested and manipulated, were submitted to what Murray called, quote, vehement, sweeping, and personally abusive attacks, close quote. These attacks were specifically tailored to assault their egos and their cherished ideas and their beliefs, which caused high levels of stress and distress within the test subjects. They were then made to view the recorded footage of their reactions to this verbal abuse repeatedly as they were analyzed. Among the abused students was 17-year-old Ted Kaczynski, a mathematician who later went on to become the Unabomber. Some sources have suggested that Murray's experiments were part of the US government's research into mind control, known as MKUltra. I won't say a lot about MKUltra here, as there's a multitude of videos and articles on the subject. But just to briefly summarize, MKUltra was a US government project designed to learn techniques in mind control using drugs and electronic influences, such as implanted chips, as well as other methods. Some of MKUltra's research included studies into the following: substances which will promote illogical thinking and impulsiveness to the point where the recipient would be discredited in public, and substances which increase the efficiency of mentation and perception. Also, materials which render the induction of hypnosis easier or otherwise enhance its usefulness, and materials and physical methods which will produce amnesia for events preceding and during their use. And finally, physical methods of producing shock and confusion over extended periods of time. Here's a quote from the US Senate hearing into the attacks on US diplomats in Cuba, response and oversight. In late 2016, staff at the United States Embassy in Havana began complaining of strange noises, and among the descriptions that they complained of was a high-pitched beam of sound, incapacitating sound, and a baffling sensation akin to driving with the window partially open in a car, or just intense pressure in one ear. At the time of this report, the Post's leadership and the supporting office here in Washington, D.C., viewed this activity as harassment from forces hostile to the United States or to the US presence in Cuba. The quote continues, "While the symptoms may vary, all of the medically confirmed cases, all 24 of them, have described some combination of the following symptoms: sharp ear pain, dull headaches, ringing in one ear, vertigo, visual focusing issues, disorientation, nausea, and extreme fatigue." Close quote. And so it seems that research into the manipulation of the human psyche has continued right up until the present day. But for obvious reasons, it remains hidden from the general public. One can only imagine how far these techniques have advanced since the 60s. It's been shown here that some scientists have no qualms experimenting on unsuspecting members of the public. And so what would these types of experiments look like today? And who would they test them on? What better test population than the fringes of our societies? The homeless, and the drug-affected, and the poverty-stricken, and the high crime areas, places where mental illness goes untreated and unnoticed, places where an artificially tormented psyche would attract little or no attention. However, there are cases reported in which the victims seem to be harassed by something other than human manipulators, something undefined and incomprehensible. I'm sure that many of you watching this video have read about or heard about Skinwalker Ranch, the bizarre case involving the harassment of a family on a remote Utah ranch, which became increasingly paranormal. There is also another less well-known case, known as the Black Forest Haunting in Colorado, which is very similar to the Skinwalker Ranch case. Orbs and entities were photographed. Entities were sometimes seen in the mirrors, but not in the room with the observer. Shadows in the shape of people were seen to be watching from the surrounding forest, and electrical devices were affected, producing weird noises and sometimes voices, just like at Skinwalker Ranch. Another phenomenon witnessed at both scenes was the observation of an almost invisible form moving about the properties, described loosely as resembling the Predator from the 1987 film Predator. Throughout these experiences, the owners of each of the properties both strongly believed that there was some sort of human agency, probably a government agency, behind all the phenomena. No matter how unexplainable and paranormal the situation got, they held on to the belief that a human agency wanted them off the land for some reason or another. And they believed that this human agency was using highly sophisticated psychological tactics to drive the families away. The following is a series of events that happened to a friend of mine. He and his wife seem to have experienced both supernatural elements and possibly some type of game-stalking activity. Whatever it was, they went through a very strange and threatening few months when they first met. Phoenix, Arizona, 2014. Brandon had just finished serving a 4-year prison sentence for selling illegal narcotics. This is not a period of his life that he is proud of, and during this time, he was not only a dealer, but also a user of various mind-altering substances. Now, he and I both know that this information will instantly put some viewers off. To their minds, the fact that he partook in narcotic substances will discredit all of these experiences. But I ask that you try to withhold your judgment until the end of the story. And remember, as you listen, Brandon was not using hallucinogens or hard drugs during this period of time, and that all of this was witnessed by 2 individuals, Brandon and his wife Tracy, who he sometimes refers to as Strange Girl in the story. It all started soon after his release from prison, when he first met his wife Tracy while selling some of his product at a party in their hometown of Phoenix.
And she was just sitting on the couch, this kind of out-of-place innocent beauty in a pit of demons. I was telling her my story. That was kind of a big deal and all, but she wasn't impressed. So I took her phone and I put my number in it with regards to procuring some mind-altering substances I was seeking. But by the end of the night, I ended up leaving her in this demon pit of a house. I didn't realize that she would have greatly appreciated a ride out of there, but it just wasn't in the direction that I was headed.
She soon called, and they met again at a different person's house. After a while, they decided to leave, and so Brandon gave Tracy a lift back to her house, and then he went on his way.
And that's when she called me and said she left her purse in the trunk of my car. So I went to check, and yeah, it was there. But I was carjacked at knife point. Like, literally a guy who had asked me for a ride down the street of that shady neighborhood had doubled back and grabbed me by the shirt and would have literally stabbed me with a knife like an inch from my gut. So I pleaded and said, dude, what the F? I just got out of prison. This is my grandma's car, you know. So he said he needed to get some things from down the street urgently and that he would bring my car back to a certain nearby motel when he was done. And I just knew I never would see him ever again. As he drove my car away, he said, give me your number. And I yelled it at him. Still, such a sick feeling of disbelief and shock over the events taking place. Simply went and sat by a bus stop for a few hours, feeling so horribly. I waited until later in the day, not even having a direction to proceed in, when I did get a text telling me to get to the motel to get my car. I went to the seedy place where the guy gave me my keys back like it was all good, and I was just so happy to have my car back, I jumped in, took off, and went to see Strange Girl.
Brandon immediately drove over to Tracy's house to return the purse. It was almost midnight by this stage, so he was reluctant when she offered for him to come inside. And once he was inside, he felt extremely uncomfortable, as if he was being observed by someone unseen. And to add to the creepiness, Tracy began acting a little strangely.
But she opened the door and made it appear as if somebody was opening the door at the exact same time as her. Her face showed the shock and surprise and everything. No one was there, though. And it was like she just did it to scare me, like the look of shock on her face and just turning the door handle. I thought someone was literally opening the door. So she finished opening the door. I pulled her outside and I asked her just what was that about. She laughed like it was funny and like it was normal, till I pointed out to her how messed up it was to do to a guy who you just snuck into your parents' house with drugs. It kind of clicked in her head what she had done was different, and she acknowledged and agreed it wasn't normal to do that. So I was truly put off by how someone could think that that was even okay. She seemed so aloof as if she hadn't even known she was doing it until I pointed it out to her. This wouldn't be the last time, but it was for now. Her purse was gone along with all my trunk contents, and it even seemed vacuumed. Much cleaner than my car ever was. Such a clean trunk area that I doubted it was even the same car. So I got in my car, which had previously had an unopened glove box, but now it was open and the items were dumped on the floor. I told her that I was going to get some cigarettes and I needed a moment, so I just left her.
The next day, Brandon met with Tracy again, and they just ran errands around town together. By nightfall, Brandon decided it might be nice to chill out with Tracy at a local park he knew of, near his grandmother's place.
So, we went over to a little desert trail by a canal near my grandmother's house. We ended up taking a walk on a desert trail, and very distinctly in the starlit bushes a few meters beyond me, we heard a very human-like sound. It was like, meh. So I went to see just who was hiding out there in the dark. Maybe it was some strange creature. Upon reaching the spot, I heard at the exact same distance away as the first time, another, meh. It didn't sound intimidating, but my companion was really freaked out by it. I wanted answers, so I went to where the sound had issued from again. And to my dismay at this point, I could clearly see the area contained nothing. And once again, the same distance away, I heard the meh again. This time she was trying frantically to call me away. This sinister thing was calling me into the night. I had to drop the pursuit in my best interest. And I was still convinced it was her cop friend or something, not trusting this strange girl just yet, and for good reason. The next day we were parked in a parking space waiting for a friend when I noticed the girl doing some strange gestures, as if it were a coded message in a sign language, touching her ear, then eye, then mouth with 2 fingers. She had a glazed and aloof look in her eyes, so I followed it to a guy in a white van signaling back the same eerie movements. He literally had 2 fingers to his mouth as well, and I was just looking, and I was incredulous at this moment. I couldn't believe that they were so blatant to do this. I grabbed her wrist while she had 2 fingers up to her mouth, and I asked her, just what the F are you doing? She says, let go of me, I'm just smoking a cigarette. So I pulled her hand far enough away from her mouth for her to see that she doesn't have a cigarette. So I asked her what cigarette. She just looked down at her empty fingers and said, oh, in complete surprise. Like it really like broke some brainwashing. Like it was like a spell had been lifted.
When Tracy snapped out of the trance, Brandon's paranoia increased somewhat. Thinking that this was all some kind of sinister plot by the people around him to bring him down for some reason, he shook it off, and later,
I decided to take us to an old friend's house who I'd grown up with. He had to be normal, right? Like, I knew this guy a long time, but I was wrong. I don't even think these people knew what they were doing. I mean, at the time, I thought these people might have just all gotten in trouble while I'd been gone. Like, what had happened, right? I'd been gone too long, and it was such a shock to see the world in this state. So it was once again evening. We were smoking pot and telling stories. I noticed a strange girl getting these glossy eyes again. So we went back from the side of my friend's yard into the garage. And I noticed strange girl getting those glossy eyes again and just staring. So I followed the stare across the garage to my friend, who seemed to be the stare instigator. Yeah, that's right. It sounds crazy, but this was not googly eyes. At first, I kind of thought, what are you doing staring into this girl's eyes who I just brought over? But this was like piercing into someone's soul type of a gaze. I realized she was locked in the stare and somewhat powerless looking, so I instinctively moved behind her and put my hand over her eyes. This immediately made him object, stating that he was just trying to help her relax. I said, bullshit, and I saw what was going on. He said to me, you know? And I simply replied, know what, mother effer?
They left the scene quickly, and shortly after, Brandon received a huge amount of texts from the friend. He was trying to convince them to come back, and oddly, Tracy thought this was a good idea, and she suggested that they do go back. Brandon was stunned by this, and had to remind Tracy of what had just happened, and how strange all of this was. Brandon then decided to visit another acquaintance, somebody he had met fairly recently at the time.
So, I took us to another place to see this guy that I'd met a few times before. And by now it's late. It's like 2 a.m. He had a hotel room because that's what these type of people do. It was day and night enterprises of the most devious sorts, but we fit right in with the scenes. So we arrived at this newer acquaintance's hotel room and began telling him our world and how it was recently really starting to get to me. He then tried to pierce my eyes with a serpent-like gaze, and he looked puzzled and told me, "How strange, you are not like most humans," and stated that he couldn't read me and he's never had that happen before. He then got Strange Girl stuck into his eyes like Shere Khan does to Mowgli in the Jungle Book. She was giggling and eye-struck, his piercing gaze diving ever deeper. He told us everything that had happened to us that day, like verbatim. I don't know what to say or do other than to think it was a cop who watched me all day. The FBI playing an elaborate hoax to mess with little old me. But no CIA rushed in to bust me. And his girlfriend took Strange Girl to the bathroom and started just rambling on in gibberish-type words. And he started to do the same to me. But he looked in my eyes, and he told me things through them. He spoke and told me that he was literally like an ancient terrestrial race of shape-shifting reptilian. I'd never heard of anything like this at this point in my life. Nor did I think this man in front of me was such a thing. But he was making claims that the Egyptians and Mesopotamians used to know about us. And that humanity is so forgetful. They said man used to watch the stars, and they show the signs of New Age and the awakening of man, and all of this, he was just spilling forth. He said that humanity is under their control from the shadows, but we're literally just like cattle on a ranch, like it's prison, right? We build our own cages, we enslave and bring about our own children's and grandchildren's enslavement and retardation for eternity. Alright, so like, it sounded kind of crazy. I couldn't see anything that he was talking about at the time because I was living completely unawake. The people, so now he claims that the people were going to wake up. So they were coming out to bag and tag every single human and enslave the whole race on the surface.
The man who claimed to be a reptilian then told Brandon that not all the reptiles want to hurt humanity, and that if the other reptilians knew that he was sharing this information, they would destroy him. Brandon was then overwhelmed with rapid-fire jargon, which seemed to be encoded with deeper meanings. The last thing he remembered was seeing Tracy in the bathroom with the female, seemingly entranced by the woman's alien babble. He then passed out. Later he regains consciousness.
I wake up, look at this guy, who's still staring at me, and he just says, "You're still here?" It's like 6 a.m. I was on instant red alert as everything came flooding back to me. I started right up, and I grabbed Strange Girl away from the other jabbering girl in the bathroom. So we opened the door to the pre-sunrise dawn. Now, this was freaky, guys. We hurried to the car, like we were just falling over ourselves to get out of there. She told me everything she knew about what had just happened. She was just giggling hysterically. Like, she didn't even say anything. She was laughing, like, hysterically. I told her, if she was a cop, why don't they just arrest me right now? She had to be for that guy to know every single thing that we'd done. And what about the rambling reptilian talk? He sounded like a homeless, drunk madman. And how did the time vanish like that, right? Like, my mind was completely boggled.
Unfortunately, the audio cuts out for some of the story here, just as Brandon's starting to describe what appears to be targeted psychological attacks. In other words, gang stalking. But luckily, I have an email of the original story, and I'll quote some of the sections here. Over the next few weeks, strange events and a threatening atmosphere continued to haunt the couple. At the time, they had no clue what was happening, but later, quote, "We found out eventually that we are what is termed targeted individuals, and that we were habitually gang-stalked. I was very open with seeking answers online, and feel I may have been saying things that drew attention. Besides, I had a big mouth and a record, along with living a lifestyle that made me an easy target. Close quote. They also began to experience unusual phenomena on their cell phone. Twisted and supernatural images could be seen. Brandon had his phone examined by a tech-savvy friend who confirmed that it had in fact been bugged, and so he had to get a new one. However, quote, the tracking continued. People would pull into an empty spot next to us and just lay on the horn while glaring at me, as if something inhuman had possessed them. I would come out of a quick stop after going to the bathroom and find newly missing rubber from the window of my car, as if someone had obviously just tried to break in. Strange Girl was the personal evidence I needed for my sanity, but she was only there mentally half of the time. The other half, she seemed to be in league with whatever forces were surveilling me. When I asked her plainly what she thought was going on, eerily she replied, I think something wants me to kill you. Close quote. Brandon was obviously taken aback, but felt that there was something trying to keep the two of them apart, and this was yet another attempt. It had the opposite effect though. It made the couple only want to cling together all the tighter. Eventually Brandon started getting shot by something that they could both hear hit the glass of the car like someone had thrown a rock, but Brandon would literally feel it hit him. He also became ultra-sensitive to the city environment. The ambulances, garbage trucks, the fire trucks, etc. They would cause him physical discomfort, and he felt affected by the radio and electric fields of the newly integrated technology within the city infrastructure. This was to continue for over a month, the couple living life on the road and living free. But the strange and threatening experiences were soon to amplify. They had driven to a friend's place in an outlying city and were coming back into Phoenix when it began to get dark.
I pulled off the freeway to take surface streets, and I saw what looked like a traffic cone, and I swear it was moving onto the road. And I slowed down because it was as I was rolling up to a stoplight. It wasn't quite in the crosswalk, but a short distance before. It was right in the middle of the road now, so I had to stop, and to be honest, I was just going to take it because I realized it was wooden, like a wooden traffic cone in front of me, so how cool was that? It dawned on me that it was not a traffic cone. I realized it was a creepy garden gnome. It had like a face and everything, and I realized someone placed it in the street. I thought maybe it was on a remote control car even, guys. Like, people were messing with us that bad, it seemed. So we saw its wooden face looking into my headlights until I made a complete stop, at which point it unfroze and kept walking across the street, onto the sidewalk, and into the oleander bushes on the side of the pavement.
His partner also witnessed this bizarre creature. Later that day, they pulled into a restaurant parking lot near a shopping mall.
And there was a cinder block wall along one side of the parking lot, dimly illuminated in the after sunset dusk on a clear desert evening. There I saw another little wooden figure sitting on it. This one looked more like a Pinocchio than a garden gnome, and I thought somebody really had to be manipulating this puppet from behind the wall. That is until I saw its legs and then its body hang down as it let itself to the ground.
Seeking answers to all of this weirdness, they decided to visit the reptilian guy that they had visited earlier, as he had alluded to a knowledge of things hidden during their last encounter.
And he had now gotten an apartment since we'd last seen him in the hotel, and it was a typical trashy North Phoenix neighborhood of industry and warehouses. We met someone nearby to make a few dollars off some plant extracts. The customer got in the back seat, and we quickly hand-to-hand exchanged what was agreed upon. He appeared normal until I turned back around. I looked up into the rearview mirror. I got quite a shock as he appeared to flick his tongue out. Then the creepy snake eyes. He looked at me in the reflection and spoke, referring to Strange Girl. He sniffed and said, "She's human? You got a nice one there." I told him that she was all mine, that we had to get going immediately. So he literally flicked his tongue out once more and hissed, then bid me good night. Enjoy, brother.
They were already on the reptilian guy's street, So they called him and asked him to come out and show them to his apartment.
He was about 40 years of age, a tall, skinny guy with ginger hair, along with the accompanying freckles and white skin complexion. By now it was about 10 p.m. I pulled into an open spot next to a dirt bike, and then he was there. He led us into his apartment, which had about 5 people inside. The door was open to beat the heat of the Phoenix night. Rap music that spoke of lizards was what greeted us. I would describe the people as satanic goths or punks. You know, dyed hair, painted nails, black clothes, metal spiked jewelry, all with a dreary demeanor. I still couldn't believe how far this guy took this stuff. He would even be wearing a t-shirt with a rattlesnake on it.
Brandon couldn't believe how far this guy and all his friends took this reptilian game. He was also sure now that the reptilian guy was either a cop or all these people were just trying to play a crazy, elaborate prank on him for some reason. The reptilian guy then gave Brandon a type of cryptic warning and gave him some advice on how to act.
So he told me that this was going to happen, and it's already dark, so they are rounding people up. He said they can't read you, and then explained that they would think that I was one of them if I drove with my high beams on and flashed my low beams. He also said to act like a lizard. At this point, I noticed Strange Girl was getting the psychobabble and snake eyes from the same girl who was at the hotel room incident. I thought to myself that I was not going to do this again. I told the guy we were going to get out of there.
And as they were leaving,
we both heard a loud, blood-curdling scream from outside the door. Reptile guy said he needed to walk us out, and I agreed, so we walked the 20 steps to the vehicle. As I was unlocking the door, he suddenly shined a flashlight right over my shoulder and barked sternly, "Don't do it, he's mine." So I looked, and there was a guy who was literally standing right next to me in the empty space that was right over my shoulder. He was standing right on my heels, towering over me and baring his teeth over me in a very Dracula-like pose. You could see a look of danger and annoyance on the human-like snarled face, which was being illuminated by the flashlight beam. It was causing his cat-like pupils to constrict.
Brandon and Tracy left the scene quickly and decided to head to Tracy's parents' house. They were driving on the unusually quiet streets
when all of a sudden I thought I had been sideswiped. It appeared as if a tree we passed had reached out and pushed the car. Strange Girl screamed and said, "Watch out for the trees." I looked at her fiercely, urging with my fervent demeanor to explain herself. She stated that as we were leaving, our friend had whispered in her mind to watch out for the trees. I told her that the guy had not mentioned trees to me, and I asked her what else she was told, because all I got was a tip about the headlights. She confirmed this was correct, and then said to turn on the brights right away and flash your low beams when people flash theirs at you. That and act like they do was all I got, but he had also told her to stay away from the trees. And it was apparently for good reason, because another tree swooped at us from its rooted position on the side of the road. I swerved and literally drove in the middle lane away from the sides of the road, where if I ventured too close, the trees would swipe violently at the vehicle. And it wasn't even windy. I tested this and also the headlight thing. Even though there were very few vehicles, the ones we started to see had been driving with their brights on and flashing their low beams. And I did this accidentally at first because I had no faith in it. I had simply turned on my brights to appease Strange Girl. But when somebody flashed their low beams at us, it was just instinct to flash my high beams. But they were already on, so I ended up flashing my low beams instead and keeping my brights on. This first car we encountered did have its brights on, and they turned them down to normal low beams and back on to leave the brights on. I automatically flashed my low beams and then left the brights on for a few cars. But when another car with brights on flashed us, and I purposely kept the low beams on, and to my surprise, the car whipped around and began to follow us until I sped ahead and whipped back around with my high beams on and flashed them to lows and back on. This did the trick. I was no longer taking anything for granted, and like I said, a scientific approach was key to preserving my sanity through this.
As they continued their drive to her parents' house, they found themselves on a highway known to them. However, along this highway, they came upon what appeared to be roadworks. The barricades, with flashing orange lights, were on both sides of the road, and continued for over 3 miles until they began closing in on either side of them.
They came to a choke point, and we rolled up to an apparently vacant red sports car with all of the doors opened up. It was parked diagonally in the middle of the road. We had only a second to observe it when the barricades on either side of us took on lifelike and human-like movement. They began quickly leaning in towards us. My companion screamed, and I simply told her, I see it and I'm on it. So I smashed my car in reverse after I saw the barricade boogie monsters. We flipped around and continued driving the wrong way down the frontage road until, strangely, still no cars were on the road, but the few we had encountered and that empty sports car. It was maybe 11 p.m. now when we got off the highway. We went to a community outside of town where I'd grown up as a teenager. Now, this was Anthem, Arizona. It's a middle-class neighborhood. They have a little water park, little community center. It's a really nice town. It's the suburbs, right? So we drove through to the town for 30 minutes, and every garage door was open. I went by some of my old friends' houses and just houses I'd known when I was a child. I wanted to see if I was still even in the same world, guys. So not only was every garage door open, but all of them were empty. Like every single one of them. My criminal mind was running rampant with ideas, but I was terrified. And where were all the vehicles? Where were all the people? We started to really freak out.
Both were terrified by this stage, and they almost felt as though they were in some type of alternative reality. In this version of Phoenix, there seemed to be very few people and very few cars. The trees seemed alive, and the people acted like lizards. Freaking out and just wanting to escape the situation, they decided they would head for Mexico.
Maybe the agents or reptiles, or our own minds, would leave us alone at the border.
But the Mexican border was a long way off, and the couple had been driving that night for hours. They decided they needed rest before they made their escape to the border, so they turned around, looking for a safe place to rest up for the night.
We were now nearing Florence, Arizona, headed down south, when I pulled off a desert exit. We ventured into the dark desert as far as I was willing to off-road with the Nissan Altima. We rolled up shirts in the windows so that they hung down, and I had nice affixed sun blinds that you pulled across the windshield and stuck together with Velcro. Now we made sure all the doors were locked and held each other in the passenger seat and shut out the world around us to gain a few hours of much-needed rest. We were too tired to even think about things, and we passed right out. We awoke to engine noise outside, and I immediately had to relieve myself. I tumbled out of the car and did my business. The desert had transformed into a planned community where cars were pouring forth, onto the highway, rush hour traffic, that I couldn't believe we had not seen the lights for this city when we had got off the exit. But now there was a gas station that seemed pretty normal a bit further down.
It seemed to Brandon and Tracy that they fell asleep in one reality and woke in another. Where there was empty desert when they fell asleep, now there was a community around them, and rush hour traffic, with a huge gas station down the road. But the story doesn't end there. When they awoke, they also witnessed semi-invisible entities similar to those described in the Black Forest haunting and also at Skinwalker Ranch. Tracy could see these entities quite clearly, while Brandon could only see a tube-like distortion in the air. Tracy described the transparent entities as looking like lizards and little people. A very interesting description, as I have done videos in the past in which people have described a type of alternate world connected to this one via portals of some kind. This alternate world is said to be inhabited by lizards and small, dwarf-like people, whose appearance is similar to the typical fairy folktale dwarves. Similar to the dwarves the couple saw on the streets of Phoenix earlier in the story. Brandon also mentions that he saw some odd-looking vegetation, like sticks with tufts of leaves at the top. The reports I've heard of this other world also make mention of very unusual vegetation. It's like the couple were experiencing a blending of worlds. They decided that Mexico was a bad idea, and so they headed back to Phoenix. The gang stalking activity continued. Brandon would set off alarms simply by walking into a store. His bank card would suddenly play up when he tried paying his bills. Tracy's strange, trance-like behaviour also continued, as if she were being influenced or controlled by someone or something. They were also constantly harassed while driving. Tailgaters, brake checkers, and oddly behaving traffic lights. Brandon and Tracy also described a type of interdimensional war that they witnessed. A battle in the sky, which both saw and heard. It seemed like a kind of dimensional overlay. At one stage, while driving around at midnight, they began to feel that they were being chased by something, and trying to escape, they decided to go off-road into the desert. And then this happened.
This ends with us smashed in a ditch. I drove the car, like we're going on this dirt road, and we bottom out. Just boom, the car turns off, the engine goes off, put it back in park, it won't start, and I don't know what to do. It just died. We bottomed out in this desert wash that washed out. So we get everything we can out of the trunk, throw some stuff in a duffel bag, like cereal and trail mix and whatever we bought that day, a jug of water. And
we were in such a rush.
I don't even think she had shoes on because she couldn't find them. And I'm like, just get out of the car, we're going, you know. It was so hectic that we were going the wrong way.
Because we were being chased, and once we bottomed out, we're just like, fuck.
Yeah, dude, we're getting away from that vehicle because things are coming to that vehicle. We're getting away immediately. Yeah. So we start going down the wash, but we realize we're going back towards the freeway. We're between this road and the freeway. We don't want any attention like that. We're just going to go and literally like hike it on foot to Mexico. Who knows? We're delusional at this point. We're getting chased by insane who knows what. Right, like this guy told us all this stuff, put this stuff in our mind, and with what we're seeing, we backtrack down this wash and find a spot because it's getting hot. There's this glowing light.
It feels like the sun would literally burn right through your skin.
Like a Phoenix, Arizona hot day. But it was like, you know, from what I could tell, midnight.
It was extreme, though.
Extreme heat. So we see this thing coming, but it's coming at a strange angle. Like really low in the sky, like not from above us, and we hunker down after we go through this wash a little ways, and it's kind of along a little washed out area where you can get some shade. There's a straggly little tree up on top of it, and we are hunkered down in the shade right there from this burning orb that's like coming in the sky that you can feel on your skin that I literally thought was going to like cook us if we didn't.
It's hard to hide from it.
So we're hunkered down here, and I'm looking around, and she's screaming again, you know, pointing at these things, and we're surrounded by these beings.
We heard an army of something coming towards us. It was like they were marching at us.
It sounded like a war movie or something, like combat, like boots on the ground, explosions, gunfire. Yeah. You could hear these things, and this is going to cut off right now, but we're going to continue it, and we'll let you know exactly what we experienced.